Once again, one of the major stories in the news is a politician who has had an affair. Media is naturally having a field day with it, but it's indicative of what's going on in many of the marriages in our country today. Fortunately, a recent Gallup poll shows that only 7% of Americans find that having an affair outside of marriage is morally acceptable. But there are other troubling statistics. Over 60% believe that having sexual relations outside of marriage are morally acceptable. Over 50% believe that having a child out of marriage is morally acceptable. Yes, the statistics are staggering. These are just a few of them. This same poll found that 48% of Americans say that homosexual relationships are also morally acceptable. In fact, in a 2009 Gallup poll, 40% of Americans believe that same-sex marriages should be legally recognized. This is up from 27% in 1997. A 2002 Gallup poll found that 37% of Americans believe that living together before marriage was morally acceptable. Concerning Americans' views on divorce, Barna Research found in their March 2008 poll that at least 33% of Americans have gone through one divorce. As you can see from the statistics, the cultural crosswinds are having a dramatic effect on how Americans view marriage in our country today, even to the point of debating the very definition of marriage itself. Recently, we sat down with Alonzo Jones of the Biblical Marriage Institute and Dr. Howard Eyrick, a professional marriage counselor, and discussed the state of marriage in America today. Here's what they had to say.
Marriage in the United States today is in deplorable condition. The divorce rate is somewhere around 50%. But that's the surface story. I've read different statistics again, but as much as 80 to 85% of those who are married would say they're unhappy in their marriage. So marriage is in pretty bad shape.
There's no such thing as an unfaithful marriage. You don't have a marriage where there's unfaithful, that's an unfaithful marriage. Faithful people make faithful spouses. Faithful marriages, if you will, marriages that exhibit a commitment level, is only going to be as good as the commitment level of the individuals involved.
I've been at this, like I said, 35 years formally. I don't know that things are really much different today than they were 35 years ago.
Unfortunately, when you look at statistics across the last 10, 12, 15 years, Christians have not fared any better than non-Christians. In fact, in some cases, depending on who you read, the research shows that even in some situations, aspects of divorce, if you will, you find a better divorce rate among some non-Christian groups compared to Christian groups.
There is no such thing as a marriage problem. There are only personal problems played out on the platform of marriage, in which a person is going to pursue what they want, regardless of the impact it's going to have on their mate. Those are the real problems, and those problems were defined in the Bible 2,000 years ago and before. We're still dealing with them. And I think sometimes today it becomes more difficult to deal with them because we camouflage them with our modern language and what we call problems, rather than dealing with those underlying spiritual issues.
I'm saying to the church, it's time to lead. It's time to step forward and to be willing to push against the culture which is coming on with all it has in terms of trying to redefine marriage and trying to, in other ways, dilute the biblical meaning, if you will, of what marriage is all about. The church needs to step up and say, listen, God created marriage, and He created it a certain way, but more than that, how do we get here? How do we get to a place as a church, where we, as a country even, where we have to begin defending and trying to restore marriage that is always been the foundations of society, if you will. In my opinion, marriage is the nucleus of society. As goes the marriage, so goes society and the world. How do we get to a place where we find ourselves trying to restore such a vital part of our culture? And I believe it's because as a church, we've abdicated our responsibility as light bearers. God has called us to be light to the world. And one way you do that is to model what is considered the ideal. Nobody's perfect, but God has placed that responsibility on the church to be the model for righteous living, if you will, in all aspects of our lives, including marriage.
If I were to challenge the church on how to better prepare marriages to be successful today, it would start by appealing to parents to start teaching their children from little on up what it means to be a Christian, what it means to walk with the Lord, what it means to treat another person with respect, what it means to honor another person, what it means to encourage another person, so that when you get to marriage, you have begun to learn some of those basic skills of interpersonal relationships.
I was reminded of something that Dr. King said, Dr. Martin Luther King, in his letter from a Birmingham jail. He used a term in there, creative extremists. He talks about in that letter how, as it related to racism, the church had taken a sort of a step backwards from it, and not just being apathetic, had begun to criticize him, and even the term extremist was being applied to Dr. King. And I thought, wow, could we find ourselves in that same type of predicament, those who are standing up for biblical marriage, where even the church, even those in the church would begin to say, you're being a little too extreme here. Well, Dr. King says, well, look, I think it's time for being creative extremists. And in other words, that is for us now a word I think we can adapt. I don't mind being called an extremist if I'm doing something that is honoring God, and if in my extremism I am upholding something that is the model for society from a biblical perspective. And so as Christians, we need to lead out. We don't need to be sheepish about this. This is a very, very critical time in our nation's history. There are a lot of changes, a lot of things coming at us very fast, and all we're called to do is to be who we are. We don't have to try to be like the world, just be who you are, and that is, if you're a believer, then you behave like a believer in every aspect of your life, including marriage.
Without question, marriages are under attack by cultural influences in a way that they probably never have before. It's important for us to make sure that we safeguard our marriages, that we protect the future for our children. I'm Bob Waldrop for the Crosswinds Foundation for Faith and Culture.